Hello and welcome to Let's Discuss Workplace AI Technologies, brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Change. I'm your host, Carrie Miller. In this episode, we'll be getting inside of employee data. It's their right and our responsibility. Let's discuss. They say data is the new oil, and when we look at all the data around us, we see that employee data is a giant oil field that generates like gazillions of barrels of this digital gold every day. It's extremely valuable, but it also has a lot of dimensions to it. This compelled me to identify a taxonomy of employee data, which is basically just a fancy way of grouping employee data into different categories. I'll go in depth in these categories in a minute, but basically there are 6 categories that most employee data falls into: personal identifying information, sensitive voluntary information, credential data, position history data, productivity data, and external data. All right, let's dive in a little deeper on these categories. So PII, or personal identifying information, tends to be the category of data that actually gets protected sometimes. It's your basic data that can identify you, just like it sounds. So like name, address, birthday, social security number, email, IP address, and so on. Then we have sensitive voluntary information. In my opinion, this is just as personal and possibly way more sensitive, but often it's not protected by laws. So here we're talking about things like payroll data, tax deductions, benefit selections, health savings account data, attendance and leave information, disability accommodations, engagement survey feedback, even like chatbot input, whistleblower reports. Then there's credential data covering things like job training, candidate assessments, security clearance level, schooling, recognition awards, things like that. Next, we have position history. So think, resume, titles, dates, but it also covers review data, coaching, customer ratings, unemployment history. Anything that someone was tagged with in a succession plan can be falling into this category. Okay, and now for the big category, productivity. People don't often think about this category, but this is a category that captures everything an employee touches, does, or says in service of the company to deliver that work. So it's their time tracking data, calls, emails, sales, widgets produced per hour, total profitability per day, and so on. Can be a lot of metadata. Which files did they touch? How long did they touch those files? All of this matters when it comes to AI. And finally, we have external data. Now, admittedly, some employers collect this data and some do not. So this data includes stuff like social media content, internet history, geolocation tracking, messages, calls, and so on that are like outside the company's normal purview. Again, some companies collect it, some do not. Now, I've skipped over a lot of very specific data. I have a whole report on this. I'll add that in the notes below. There's a lot more to it. That gives you a general flavor. So, but why do we even care about this? Yeah, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but let's see if I can shed some light, shall we? The first set of reasons are very traditional. Some of this data is subject to laws and regulations, of course. So we need to be very aware of these laws because we are seeing a ton of change in the laws right now. So you really need to understand what data you have in order to manage your risks. Second is ye old security risks. Frankly, the more data you have in your possession, the more service providers you have hanging around, the more risk exposure you have for you and for your employees. Which brings us to your moral and ethical duties to protect your employees from harms. So even if that protection means keeping their data safe from bad actors who will pay big bucks for this information, you've got to pay attention to that part too. Okay, then the second grouping of reasons have to do with the future of work, right? Industry 4.0, we like to call it in my line of work, because we're big giant nerds and we're not ashamed to say it. So here's the thing to understand with the future of work. Data really is the new oil. I mean, it can make a company really, really rich. So when we give it away without establishing proper levels of consent or dictating our expectations of privacy, we've kind of got a problem. So more importantly, all sorts of issues can pop up when we willingly or unwillingly allow our employees' data to be used to power up algorithms. We have an obligation to make sure their data is being used fairly, that it's not perpetrating discrimination, that whatever the algorithm is doing with it is explainable, and that the end result is not causing any harm to the well-being of our employees. And that's a pretty big responsibility, right? And the more data we have from our employees, the bigger that responsibility gets. So let's talk about some key governance mechanisms. In this case, I want to focus on procurement practices and contract clauses. This is where you can protect yourselves, right? So in procurement practices, there are questions you can ask. Please provide a list of all data you collect, dear service provider. Please mark the sensitive data when you provide that list. Please explain how all the data is used in all of your algorithms. I want to know specifically where things are happening and what you're doing with it. How long do you keep each data point? Is it ever used for other reasons or other customers? Please provide a list of disclosures we are expected to agree to regarding our data. That's a critical one. All right, on to contract clauses. Maybe we ask that data must be collected at a minimum and only for the express purposes of the agreed upon use. Maybe we say that data must be kept private, safe, and secure, that it must not be sold, shared, or used to create new products or services for us or other customers, that it must be destroyed upon contract termination, that an annual review of data usage is required so that we can understand current and planned data capture, what's going to be retained, what's going to be used, and what is going to be what we call deprecated or deleted for our needs. And that's it. That's our discussion for today. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another workplace AI use case discussion. Have a wonderful week, everyone.